1957, Carl Rogers published a paper that the field of psychology has been arguing about ever since. The title was The Necessary and Sufficient Conditions of Therapeutic Personality Change. Not the helpful conditions, not the useful conditions, the necessary and sufficient conditions. The complete list of what it actually takes for therapy to work. Rogers proposed 6. 3 of them were about therapists. Empathy, the therapist's ability to accurately perceive the client's internal world and communicate that perception back. Unconditional positive regard, a warm, non-judgmental acceptance of the clients regardless of what they bring. And congruence, the therapist's own genuineness and authenticity in the relationship. The argument this paper started was not really about whether these 3 things mattered. Everybody in the field agreed they mattered. The argument was about whether they were sufficient, whether the therapeutic relationship itself, independent of technique, independent of theoretical orientation, was enough. 50 years of research later, the answer is something more complicated and more interesting than either side expected. The therapeutic relationship is not all that matters. Specific techniques matter. The match between the client's problems and the evidence-based treatment for that problem matters. But across every study, every population, every treatment approach, the quality of therapeutic relationship consistently accounts for more variance in treatment outcomes than any other single variable. It matters more than which therapy is used, more than the therapist's years of experience, more than the specific technique deployed. This is what research says, and understanding it deeply, not just as a talking point, changes how you work. This is the Leicester Lifeline podcast. I am Matt. Welcome everyone to today's episode. We're going to cover something that I'm hoping gives you a break from all the numbers and monotony of the last couple or so episodes and really look at the therapeutic relationship. So, this is a little different from a lot of what we've done, yet it underlies everything that we talk about. Everything that we learn from the DSM-5, everything, all those numbers that we discussed with some of the statistics and research, all those assessment tools that we went over. This underlines all of that. It is how we use it and how effectively we connect with the people that we are working with. So regardless of what modalities you decide to go with, regardless of your years of experience, there are pieces, there are these variables that just make therapy and that connection that we have with the people that are in front of us that much more effective and just a positive experience for everyone involved. But before we get going into that stuff, if this is your first episode, welcome. Go to LeicesterLifeline.com. Make sure you download the free study roadmap PDF that I put together, complete 12 domains in the NCE. And it's just a guide that I'm hoping can go along with your studies and just prepare you a little bit more. Second, the free Leicester Lifeline newsletter, also available through the website, just lets you go deeper into the topics that we're discussing each week in the podcast. It's, again, just another nice free study tool that people can leverage toward their process of getting prepared for these tests. Third, Leicester Lifeline Circle group, that has been going, that is going great. It's so fun to see all these people in the group coming to the study halls. I'm really enjoying it. But this is another resource that I offer. You can become a part of this group. It's $29.95 a month. You can cancel anytime. You do get a free 2-week trial. So if anything, just go take a look. You can cancel anytime. You don't have to put a credit card down or anything with the 2-week trial. You can just take a look for 2 weeks. And I hope to earn your ability to use this as a resource. Something I've been kicking around after talking about the circle group here is how advertisements and sponsorship shows up in this show. And I came to a conclusion last week. I along with making podcasts, I listen to a ton of podcasts. I probably listen to about 10 a day. And, it's everything from horror to fantasy podcasts to finance and history. And I throw some psychology podcasts in there as well. But, in all those podcasts, most of them have advertisements. And, as somebody that listens to a lot, like oftentimes I just feel like I'm held captive to have to listen to these episodes as part of me just getting the information that I'm trying to get or the entertainment that I'm trying to get out of those podcasts. So I have decided that I am not going to do any advertisements on this podcast ever. That is something I am committing to. I do have products that I'm creating right now, and those are pretty much sufficient for me as a way to generate income from this podcast. If you decide that you see something that I've created and you feel like that it aligns with what you've got going on, awesome. That's kind of what I hope when I create these things. But, I don't want to just have this being some vehicle for advertisements. And so that is a commitment that I am making for this show. Lastly, if you like what you hear, please pass this along. This is community. We're creating community here. If you know somebody in your classes that you think this might benefit, pass this podcast along. All right, let's get going. All right, let's check out what is in the news this week. New research on rupture and repair from the July 2026 issue of Psychotherapy Research, a theory-building case study on collaborative working models of alliance rupture repair was published this week, alongside research examining the therapist's interpersonal factors, specifically professional self-doubt and self-compassion, and their relationship to rupture repair strategies in a simulated cultural rupture task. Here's what the research tells us that matters clinically. Ruptures in the therapeutic alliance, moments where the connection breaks down or the client feels misunderstood, are not exceptional events that signal therapeutic failure. They are normal, expected occurrences in virtually every course of treatment. What distinguishes effective from less effective therapy is not the absence of rupture, but the ability to repair them. This is something that you need to be able to navigate. Especially early on, you're going to leave sessions and wonder if you just ruined somebody's life. I leave sessions today sometimes wondering if I just ruined somebody's life, given what I said or the path that we went down in that session. And the reality of this is it is all part of the process. It is not discussed enough just how relationship-based this profession is. You are creating relationships with people and supporting them through really difficult times in their lives or through times in their lives that they just need some support navigating. And, you are going to have favorites. You are going to have people that you are excited to see. You're going to have people that you're not so excited to see on a weekly basis. And that is the reality of this. It's just like having friends. It's just like having family. These are going to be relationships that you're going to build. And some people they're very, very guarded about putting any personal information about themselves out there. I mean, I know therapists that their clients don't know that they have kids or are even married in some instances. But it is like you kind of navigate these things and you start to see where these pieces are appropriate for that relationship. It's always coming from a place of how is this going to help the individual that is in front of me and that I'm working with. All right, next story. Researchers studying the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy published findings this month examining the therapeutic alliance as a key mechanism of change in this emerging treatment modality, noting that the alliance has accounted for meaningful variance in the therapeutic outcomes independent of theoretical orientation, number of sessions, and rates of change and improvements across decades of psychotherapy research. Worth knowing about. As you enter this field, psychedelics are one of these things that is really picking up steam. I'm seeing more and more here in Colorado. They have been legalized. Well, they're no longer, you can no longer get arrested for having psychedelics or using psychedelics. So it's really paved the way for just therapy around psychedelics. And it really is like, I know my wife is somebody that is certified for psychedelic use with therapy, and it can really be something that's beneficial. I have clients that use psychedelics on a quarterly basis just as part of their process, part of their therapeutic process toward, the mending that they're trying to do of themselves. It is something that you do have to watch. Like, there is such thing as too much of a good thing. The frequency of psychedelics, especially for a therapeutic level, is absolutely something that is to be determined. But it is. It's kind of neat to see where this is going. Okay, let's get into the main body of what we're talking about today. We're going to start with 4 frameworks. So first up, the first framework is the common factors model. The common factors model emerged from a simple but disruptive observation across studies comparing different psychotherapy approaches, CBT versus psychodynamic versus humanistic versus behavioral. The differences in outcome between approaches were consistently smaller than expected, sometimes negligible. The therapists that looked radically different in theory produced remarkably similar outcomes in practice, right? So, what we're saying here is across all these different modalities that are seemingly very different from each other, outcomes were pretty much the same. Saul Rosenwig noticed that as early as 1936, the phenomenon eventually became known as the dodo bird verdict from the dodo birds declaration in Alice in Wonderland. Everybody has won and all shall have prizes. The differences between therapists matters less than what they share. What they share are common factors, the elements present in virtually every effective therapeutic relationship, regardless of the theoretical orientation. So, we pick these orientations, or we gravitate toward these orientations, I should say, that we're inundated with in grad school. And they're very much so personality based. And, my wife is big time into psychodynamic therapeutic approach. Meanwhile, I tend toward more of the behavioristic therapeutic approaches. Just because, we do these kind of different therapies, when you look at satisfaction from our clients, you don't see a significant difference in, satisfaction or outcomes because she uses psychodynamic or because I use like CBT, DBT, narrative therapies, things like that. We're saying here is there's not one necessarily that's better than the other, but the comfort level that we adopt around these things, the personality that we have that speaks to who we are and how we use these modalities really makes the difference. So when we look at the therapeutic alliance, it's the quality of the quality of a collaborative relationship between therapist and client. Consequently, that is the strongest predictor. So empathy is right there at the top. The therapist's accurate understanding of the client's subjective experience and the client's sense of feeling of being understood. You being able to put yourself in your client's shoes, and they actually being able to feel that you have put yourself in their shoes. Goal consensus and collaboration. Therapists and clients sharing an understanding of what they are working toward and agreeing on how to get there. I think this is something that is often overlooked in initial therapeutic sessions. People go to coaching and they get like a life coach, let's say. And the interesting thing between life coaching and therapy is they're very, very similar, but life coaching tends to have a more directive approach, tends to have a little bit more of a goal-oriented approach that therapy doesn't oftentimes, based on the therapist, you just don't see it very often. Some therapists I know, including myself, do talk goals, do talk, outcomes at the beginning of the therapeutic process. What is the person looking to gain from therapy? What is that person looking to gain from their work with myself? What are the things that they are trying to achieve? But even going beyond that, like looking at a little bit more of a goal-oriented approach, having this goal consensus, and then agreeing on that with your client and saying like, this is what success, this is what goal attainment looks like for me. My relationship is better. I'm able to talk to my significant other better. I drink a lot less alcohol. I'm able to, walk up the stairs to go to the L stop. If you know what the L is, it's elevated trains in Chicago, without breaking out in a sweat and getting my shirts totally, make myself a mess. So, it's good to have these conversations at the beginning to see like what those expectations are. And the next, sure enough, expectations and hope, the client's belief that change is possible. Jerome Frank called the restoration of morale. That's another big thing that their therapist and therapy provides to a person is hope. People come to us oftentimes looking to just find hope. That sense that, that this isn't some impossible thing that they're dealing with, that they can get to a better place. And we are there to give them that hope. All right, let's get into the second framework. This is Borden's working alliance model. In 1979, Edward Borden proposed a model of the therapeutic alliance that became the dominant framework for research and clinical practice. He identified three components. First, goals. The degree to which therapist and client agree on the target of therapy. What are we working towards? What does success look like? Stuff I just got done talking about. When therapist and client have different goals, even implicitly, the alliance suffer. I think some therapists do kind of work from that place of, these are the goals that I have for this person versus these are the goals that I came up with this individual together and collaboratively, so we can achieve what they are looking for, not necessarily what you hope for them. Next, task, the degree to which therapist and client agree on the methods, activities of therapy. What will this actually look like? Does the client understand and accept the rationale for the therapeutic approach? A client who doesn't understand why they are being asked to keep a thought diary will not engage with the exercise effectively, regardless of its evidence base. And this is a huge one. Like, you never give out homework without a explanation that comes back around to the goals that you have for treatment. Just giving tasks or even just talking about things in a way that are helpful, like, something like keeping a journal or a thought diary, super, super helpful. But if you can't conceptualize this for an individual based in their world, based in the things that they're working toward in therapy, they're not going to do it a lot of the times, or they're not going to see the point of doing it. Next, we have bond, the quality of emotional connection between therapist and client, trust, caring, in a sense of the therapist is genuinely invested in this person's well-being. I don't think that one needs any further explanation. Borden argued that all three components are necessary and that disruptions to any one of them constitutes a rupture in the alliance. A client who agrees on goals and tasks but doesn't feel genuinely cared for has a compromised alliance. A client who feels warmly connected to the therapist but disagrees about what the therapy should be working on has a different kind of compromised alliance. So all of this, again, is we're just working on this relationship with people, and all these components can result in ruptures. And again, ruptures are part of the process, depending on how big they are. I have been fired by clients before because of ruptures. but they do make for really good talking points for individuals that, can kind of have that place and understand, like, again, this is part of the process. All right. Third framework, rupture and repair. Let's get into these. Ruptures in therapeutic alliance are inevitable. Research by Jeremy Safran and colleagues identified two primary types of ruptures. First up, withdrawal ruptures. The client pulls back from the therapeutic relationship, becomes less engaged, more guarded, less forthcoming, misses session, gives one-word answers. The withdrawal is often subtle enough that the therapist focuses on technique rather than a relationship, and might not notice it until the client has dropped out. So, you do learn how to kind of read the room as you work with people better and better and better. What seems like, somebody just being flighty and missing sessions might actually be because of such a significant rupture with them that they are just disengaging. And this is part of them disengaging. The important piece here is you find the verbiage, the vocabulary that allows you to speak to them about what happened. Just being able to say, hey, I noticed that after this conversation that we had, you've been coming less and less, or I've noticed that you seemed a little withdrawn lately. Can we speak to that? Can we talk a little bit about what's going on there? Next up, we have confrontation ruptures. The client directly expresses his dissatisfaction, frustration, or disagreement, either with the therapist or with the therapy. Complaints about the approach, challenges to the therapist's understanding, direct expressions of frustration and anger. This is something that I've seen maybe every once in a while, a handful of times in my 20-year career. This is something I've seen maybe from clients, maybe a handful of times. Most of the time that I've experienced this is, when I'm getting transferred from somebody else that had a bad experience with another therapist and they're already frustrated and angry with the whole process. A lot of the times it's something that's happened in that individual's life has nothing to do with you, but you make a really good target because of the relationship that you have with this individual. But usually frustrations and anger get talked about before they even get to that place. Somebody might bring up I just don't feel like this is giving me what I need right now. And you get to talk about it and okay, then what do you need right now? Before it even gets to that place of frustration. But both types of ruptures, again, are normal and both represent clinical opportunity. Research consistently shows that ruptures are the detected and successfully repaired are associated with better outcomes in therapy. So the repair sequence for a rupture, let's kind of go through this. The therapist notices the rupture, a shift in the client engagement, a withdrawal, a direct expression of frustration. The therapist names it, not defensively, not apologetically, but with genuine curiosity. Curiosity is your friend. If there is ever a point where you're just oh, shoot, what's going on with this person? Express that question. You don't need to necessarily confront, that piece where it's just you've been missing sessions. What's wrong with you for missing sessions? I know you'd never say that, but there's no reason to necessarily confront people about this. You can just be curious and, speak to what's going on right now in their world. Therapist explores the rupture collaboratively. What did the client experience? What did the therapist do or not do that contributed? This requires the therapist to be able to tolerate and not knowing the resistance or not knowing to pull the resistance toward the self justification and to remain genuinely curious about the client's experience. And that's kind of the knee-jerk response to this, right? Is you want to get defensive. You want to defend yourself and say why. But you want to resist that and remain just genuinely curious. Remember, this is not about you. This is about the relationship. Then the rupture is understood and the relationship is renegotiated. Goals, task, bond elements are adjusted based on what the rupture revealed. So after you kind of get through this phase of really exploring what's happened with the rupture, you can. Like, this gives you this opportunity to just redefine things in the relationship and move on to the next place. What makes this difficult is the same skills that produce ruptures. The therapist's own needs, blind spots, and reactions are often the obstacles to repair. A therapist who defends themselves when the client expresses frustration has confirmed the rupture rather than repaired it. A therapist who cannot tolerate ambiguity will rush to resolve discomfort rather than sitting with client in a long enough understanding just to develop that. As soon as I see ambiguity, I think of motivational interviewing, and that's a great place to come from with curiosity, is having that ambiguity discussed through motivational interviewing. Framework 4, Rogers' core conditions and their research legacy. Carl Rogers' 3 core conditions, empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence, have generated more research than almost any other concept in the history of psychotherapy. I think a lot of people think CBT is like one of the most researched, but Rogers' client-centered approach to therapy is way up there as well. And what research shows is empathy, specifically accurate empathy, the ability to perceive and to communicate back the client's subjective experience, is consistently associated with positive outcomes across studies. The key word is accurate. Empathy that misses the mark, that reflects back something the client doesn't actually feel, can be worse than neutrality. Empathy is one of those things, it's... that is a therapist, right? I don't think it would be too hard of a proof to say that many therapists are kind of born into therapy, or they at least have training very, very early on in their lives with becoming just really empathetic individuals. I think the double-edged sword behind empathy, or an empathetic individual, is often that people-pleasing piece. So something that you need to kind of watch with yourself when you are kind of following and really trying to accurately empathize with that person in front of you. Next up, we have unconditional positive regard. I just love the idea of unconditional positive regard. It's always been, whenever I saw it in grad school, it's just always like, yes, like that makes sense to me. But this is consistently associated with clients' engagement, disclosure, and willingness to explore difficult material. Clients who feel judged reduce their openness and explore less deeply. The unconditional element is important. Positive regard that is contingent on the client's behavior in particular ways, making progress, complying with homework, not expressing anger, is not unconditional. I'm not going to say it's hard to have unconditional positive regard, but it's something that we just need to check. Like, it's going to be there. It's going to be there in the background, or the sense of not having unconditional positive regard. It's going to be in the background. It is going to be one of those things that, you don't want to judge. You're sitting there like, oh, they're not doing their homework, or, they're not doing the things that we talked about between sessions. And, you start to kind of form like, this person's a slacker type mentality. But you do, like, you learn really well how to start kind of just catching that, and just being like, this is where this person is right now. They're not in that space to do these things. So, with that unconditional positive regard, you might shift. You might make a little bit of a shift and shift toward another way of doing, another way of being. Maybe you just stop giving homework. Last up, we have congruence. The therapist's genuineness and authenticity is the most complex and most debated of the 3. Research supports is less consistent than for empathy and positive regard. The clinical consensus is that congruence matters, that clients can sense inauthenticity, and that it undermines the relationship, but that its expression requires clinical judgment. Sharing every reaction the therapist has is not congruent. It is self-disclosure without clinical rationale. So I said before, talking about things, that self-disclosure piece, we have to frame it in a way that we think about how this helps the individual and how it helps the client, right? So, telling a story about your weekend and about how much fun you had at a lake house or something like that with your family, it's again, like, why are you doing this? How is this helping anybody? And it is like sometimes I'll tell a story and be like, wow, that was unnecessary. But other times I will tell stories about my relationship or about an experience that I had that directly aligns with, what I'm working on with that person. And we're able to have this moment of not only, is there this thing that we can kind of pick apart, but there's this thing that we share, and it creates that congruence. Rogers proposed these conditions as sufficient, independent of any particular technique. The research does not fully support this. Specific techniques add value, particularly for specific presenting concerns, but the conditions Rogers identifies remains foundational. They are relational containers within which specific techniques become very effective. Let's look at how the exam organizes these therapeutic relationship questions. First, is the question about what makes the therapy work across orientations? Common factors. Therapeutic alliance has as the strongest common factor empathy, positive regard, congruence, goal consensus, collaboration, and hope. Next is the question about the specific components of the alliance. This is Borden's 3-part model. So goals, task, bond. All 3 of these are required. And then you also have the working alliance inventory, which measures all 3 of these. So it's an inventory that we can use to measure all 3 of these that we can give our clients. Next is the question about what to do when the therapy stalls or the client becomes disengaged. This is rupture and repair. Identify the rupture type, withdrawal or confrontation. Name it collaboratively. Explore without defending this. And then you get to renegotiate. Lastly, is the question about the therapist's role in the relationship. This is Rogers' core conditions: empathy, unconditional positive regard, congruence, not as techniques, but as relational stances. That's one of the neat things with some of the modalities that are out there, and I put that in quotation marks that you can't see, is, we're not always given like a step A, step B, step C that we're following when we're working with individuals. Sometimes, like with Rogers, we're giving a way of being in the room, a way of being with our clients. And that's one of the things I really like about his approach. Okay, let's get into some multiple choice questions. Question number 1. A researcher compares outcomes across 4 different psychotherapy approaches: cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, humanistic therapy, and behavioral therapy for clients with generalized anxiety. She finds that all 4 approaches produce significantly better outcomes than a waitlist control. But that difference in outcomes between the 4 active treatments are small and statistically non-significant. This pattern of findings is most consistent with which concept in the psychotherapy research literature? Is this A, specificity hypothesis? Each therapy works through its own unique mechanism. Is it B, the dodo bird verdict? Different therapy approaches produce similar outcomes, suggest that common factors shared across approaches account for much of the variance in outcome. C, allegiance effect. Researchers tend to find results favor their preferred approach. Or D, the dose-response relationship. More sessions produce better outcomes regardless of the approach. Answer is going to be B. Love that one. The dodo bird verdict. Stuff like this where it's just wild and weird answers. The dodo bird, it just makes it so much easier to remember. I wish more stuff was like that on these tests. Named for the character in Alice in Wonderland who declares everybody has won and all shall receive prizes. All right. Next up, question 2. A therapist is using the Boarding's working alliance model to understand why a client seems to be making slow progress despite attending sessions regularly. The therapist notices that the client seems to warm and engage in the relationship, but consistently expresses uncertainty about whether therapy is the right approach for her problem. She often asks, why are we doing this anyway? And is this actually going to help? According to Borden's model, which component of the working alliance is most disrupted in this case? Is it A, bond, the emotional connection between the therapist and client is insufficient? Goals, B, therapist and the client have not agreed on the target of therapy. C, task, the client does not understand or accept the rationale for the therapeutic methods being used. Or D, congruence, the therapist is not being genuine about the evidence-based of their approach. Answer is going to be C, task. Borden's 3-part model identifies goals, task, and bond as the components of the working alliance. The client in this scenario appears to have a warm connection with the therapist, bonds intact, and is engaged enough to keep attending, but consistently questions the method and rationale of therapy. That's task disruption. So those questions, why are we doing this? And is this actually helping? Directly signal a disruption in the task component. Memory strategy. Borden equals goals plus task plus bond. Goals equal what we're working towards. Task equals how we're going to get there. Bond equals the emotional connection. Next up, question 3. A client who has been in therapy for 2 months begins a session by saying, I've been thinking about this, and I don't think you really understand what I'm going through. Last week, when you suggested I try reframing my thoughts, it felt like you were dismissing how bad things actually are. According to alliance rupture research, which of the following most accurately describes this event and appropriate clinical response? Is this going to be A, this is a confrontation rupture. The client has directly expressed dissatisfaction. The therapist should explore the client's experience with genuine curiosity rather than defending the interventions. Is it B, this is withdrawal rupture. The client is pulling away from the relationship and the therapist should proceed with the session as planned to avoid reinforcing the behavior. C, this is a treatment failure. The client's dissatisfaction indicates the therapeutic approach is not appropriate and a referral should be considered. Or is it D, this is resistance. The therapist should use motivational interviewing techniques to explore the client's ambivalence about change. Answer is going to be A, a confrontation rupture. Safran and colleagues identified 2 primary rupture types: withdrawal ruptures involving the clients pulling back, becoming less engaged, more guarded, missing sessions. Confrontation ruptures involving the clients directly expressing dissatisfaction or frustration with the therapist or the approach. This client's direct statement, I don't think you really understand me, feels or this is textbook confrontation rupture, right? Pretty easy here. Memory strategy. Withdrawal rupture equals pulling back, going quiet, missing sessions. Confrontation rupture equals direct expression of frustration or dissatisfaction. They're confronting you, right? Question number 4. According to Carl Rogers, necessary and sufficient conditions of therapeutic change, which of the following most accurately describes the concept of empathy as Rogers defines it? Is it A, the therapist's agreement with the client's perspective on their problems and the accuracy of the self-perception? Is it B, therapist's accurate perception of the client's internal world and the communication of the understanding back to the clients in a way that the client can recognize? C, the therapist's emotional reaction to the client's distress, feeling what the client feels? Or D, the therapist's expression of warmth and positive regard regardless of what the client brings to session? Answer is going to be B, Rogers defines empathy specifically as the therapist's ability to accurately perceive the client's internal frame of reference, their feelings, meanings, and subjective experience, and to communicate that perception back in the way the client can recognize. Memory strategy for this one. Rogers empathy equals accurate perception of the client's internal world plus communication of that perception back. So it's not enough just to feel it, but you have to be able to figure out some way to communicate it back to this person that you are feeling it. All right, last question. Research on therapist effects in psychotherapy has consistently found that the identity of the therapist, which specific clinician provides treatment, accounts for a significant portion of the variance in clients' outcomes, independent of the treatment approach used. Which of the following clinical implications is most consistent with this research? Is it A, a therapist's experience and years of practice are primarily determinants of therapist effectiveness? More experienced therapists consistently outperform less experienced ones. Is it B, the therapist as a person? The relational skills, their capacity for empathy, their ability to form and maintain therapeutic alliance contribute meaningfully to client outcomes independent of therapeutic orientation or specific techniques. C, therapist effects are best addressed through adherence to treatment manuals, manualizing therapies, eliminate the variance attributed to individual therapeutic differences, or D, the therapist effects are primarily explained by client preference. Clients do better with therapists they personally like. Answer to this is going to be B. Research says findings that some therapists consistently produce better outcomes than others across clients and conditions points toward the therapist as a person rather than years of experience or theoretical orientation. There's some pretty interesting information around these, and I don't want to quote the studies, but I feel like I seem to remember seeing a study that actually spoke to the more years of experience that the therapist has, the less effective that they become. Don't hold me to that, but you can look some of these studies up if you want, but it kind of makes sense when you think about, people that are in the therapy world for a really long time. Unless you stay on top of studying, unless you stay on top of your game, it does. Some people can fall into traps just around not really giving their best when they are in the therapeutic alliance. Okay. Some things to carry with you from this show. 1, the therapeutic alliance is the strongest predictor of therapeutic outcome across approaches, populations, and presenting concerns. 2, Borden's 3-part model, goals, task, bond. Ruptures can occur in any component. Identify which one and address it specifically. The working alliance inventories measures all 3 of these. 3, ruptures are normal and repairable. Withdrawal, confrontation, both signal something important about the client's needs, the repair process, all of this. All right. The newsletter for this week is going to go deeper into all this stuff. Please, if you're not subscribed to it, go subscribe to it. It's free. It just reinforces and gives you more information for the test. It's something that I think is very helpful. Couple of things before we close the episode. First, I got a really nice email about 3 weeks or so ago. I had made a comment about EMDR not being as effective online as it is in person. And this person that reached out to me was actually studying EMDR, and they showed me that some of the platforms that they're using now online can be as effective as in person. So something to keep in mind. I really appreciate emails like that where people are able to see, actually, you're not right on this one. You are wrong. So, if there's ever something that comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. That is going to be leicesterlifeline@gmail.com. Send me notes there, suggestions for topics you want me to cover, shows you'd like to listen to, or mistakes that I've made. I make mistakes, so just keep that in mind. Lastly, everything from today's episode, study guides, some deep dive quizzes, things like that I create, and they go into that Leicester Lifeline study group. So again, you actually have some quizzes in there that you can take. And there's actually some study guides in there that you can download and use. So if you haven't taken a look yet, go take a look. It's free for 2 weeks. And then if you want to go forward with it, it's your choice. It's $29.95 to continue. Share this episode. Enjoy this episode. And until next time, never stop learning.